Welcome guys, we're gonna get started here in just a moment. As usual, takes a minute for people to sign on, so we're gonna give them a chance. I'm also gonna invite some people who might be interested in joining. Feel free to invite anyone who you think might enjoy today's class. All right. Okay, we'll get started in just a few seconds, so please be patient with me. Hey August, Deborah, welcome. Melissa, good to see you. And Laura, good to see you as well. Alright, so I don't want to wait too long because this is supposed to be a short session. So this is just a variation of what I just call my sort of standard hip flow. What that means is some poses have been left out, and the idea is that it fits within about a 45-minute time frame. So you could do it, during lunch or, when you don't have a lot of time. So again, I know a lot of people do these videos later, so it's obviously not lunchtime right now, but all of you that are here, I assume you have a little bit of time to practice. All right, so right into it. We're going to start with a half butterfly. So again, this is a flow for our hips. So the focus will be stretching the muscles around the hip joint. So this is the position. The right leg is straight. The left foot comes to the inside of the thigh. And then I let my upper body relax forward and down over that leg. Now, you want to check and make sure that what you're doing feels safe for your body. I can't tell by looking at you, not that I could see you, but even if I could see you, it doesn't give me enough information to tell if you're actually safe or not. Most of what's going to tell you whether you're safe or not is how you feel in the pose. Okay? So you're coming down and you're like, this feels safe. I might feel a stretch here. I want you to make sure you feel that, but it feels safe. And those are the two things that you need to check for yourself. I feel safe. I feel the stretch. Okay? And then very briefly we'll go over use of the props. For more intensity, you can try sitting on something like this block, and that'll push you forward a little more aggressively. You could put a block underneath the left knee to help support it. Okay, if that leg feels vulnerable, again, that's one of the things that might make you feel like this isn't safe. You can use blocks to support you in front, like this under your elbows, or maybe something under your forehead like so. Okay? And again, that's mostly going to be a safety issue. If it feels like it's not safe what you're doing, then that adding a little bit of support might help. Of course, you could use these other props instead. So a bolster, supporting yourself again. Some people use it this way. If you've got these props, not everyone has them. And then you could sit on the blanket instead of the block. So the block's a little extreme. I find it anyway, but sometimes I like sitting on a blanket. Okay, now if you are new to Yin Yoga, there's a few things that I should mention. You might have already noticed we've been here for a few minutes, and that is basically the hallmark of a Yin class. If you're doing a Yin class and you're not holding the postures for minutes at a time, then you may not actually be doing a Yin class. The minimum is, I'd say, 1 minute. Not every posture. There might be postures between the longer ones where you're moving a little bit more. It also might be a fusion class where you're doing some Yin and some what we might call Yang, which is more active movement. But if it's going to have that title Yin, it's going to have that name Yin, then generally you should be holding postures for a prolonged period of time. So today we're doing 5 minutes. And so it's very ambitious of me to try and do 5 minutes holds and still get it in at about 45 minutes. But I think we'll be able to do that. Good morning. All right, so just stay with it. Holding is very important. And the other part is relaxing into it. So some people, they like to do this. They sort of pull themselves down into pose. If you're holding for a shorter amount of time, you might need to do that. So 30 seconds, something like that, it might be helpful. But generally speaking, for 5 minutes, it has a different effect. And so what you'd like to do is just relax. And you might not feel a super intense stretch right away, but you might find that after a few minutes, that intensity, it gets intense. It feels nice and juicy after a little bit, okay? So we have less than a minute left here. Thank you for being patient. Just stay with it. And then we're going to switch sides and we'll do the other side. If you're joining us a little late, which some of you are, then what I'm going to invite you to do is just take both legs straight and fold forward. It's not exactly the same thing, but you'll get a stretch under both legs. It just won't be quite as intense, but at least you'll maintain your balance there. Okay, so again, we have just a few seconds left here. I'm going to ring the gong, and then we will switch to our next posture, the other side, namely. All right, otherwise, if you have both legs straight, you're just going to stay with that. All right, so if you join from the beginning, you're going to do this. This is called a half butterfly. All right, coming down on the other side like this. So this is my right foot, left leg straight. Again, if you joined late, I recommend just this. Or if you want, you can do 2 minutes, 30 seconds on either side. Again, for anyone who's less familiar with the Yin practice, we're going to be here for about 5 minutes, and I want you to relax during that time. So you don't need to pull or push yourself into it. Just try and let yourself relax. Let gravity take over, okay? And we'll be here for about 4 more minutes. I already mentioned the use of the props. And what we're doing in today's class is we're trying to stretch the muscles and the connective tissue that is around the hip joint. And so that's why it's a flow for the hips. That's our main thing that we're trying to do here, is create and maintain mobility in our hips and our legs. So this is a very good use of our time, because if you have some elderly parents, or maybe your grandparents are elderly, and I'll let you decide what age makes someone elderly. But you may have noticed that they are not as mobile as maybe they once were, or they're not as mobile compared to younger people. Generally, we think, right, the younger someone is, the more lively they are, the more easy it is for them to move. As we begin to age, we have more aches and pains and pangs in our body. We also have less flexibility. Now, these things are very likely linked together. So if I want less pangs and pains and aches, then I very likely need to keep my mobility up. And what that means is maintaining my mobility. You may have never heard that before. You might have thought that there's nothing you can do, that as you age, you just sort of lose your mobility, you lose your strength. There's nothing that can be done about it. But what we're learning is there's a lot that can be done about it. So again, spending this time doing these postures, stretching out, really good use of your time. Okay, we're going to be here for about 2 minutes, 30 seconds more. If you have a question for me, feel free to drop that in the comments. I'll try and keep an eye on it, but I don't think it makes a sound when you comment, so I may not see it right away. All right, so be patient if I don't answer your question right away. Again, if you're joining us late, and some of you are, I want you to have both legs straight, and you're just folding forward and down, nice and relaxed. No need to grab your feet. Just going to relax into it. Let your head hang, and again, if you've got props, you can use a little bit of support. I usually mention when I'm mentioning props that yin and restorative are very different practices, and so you don't want to practice yin in the same way that you would practice restorative yoga. Okay, so just enough support and not more than that. All right, we've got a bit over a minute left here. All right, now we're going to take a very short break. So coming back onto your back, you relax and just allow yourself to feel the rebound, okay, the sort of after effect of that posture, the sensations wherever they are. Good. Then we'll bring our legs in, give them a nice little squeeze. We can make circles with our knees. We can rock back and forth. Try some different things out. And then we'll hinge up to seated. So hands under hips. We extend the legs up, lift the head and neck. Take a deep breath. Exhale, lower the legs toward the ground. Hover for a moment. Pop the legs up and come on up to seated. Good. Our next pose is designed to stretch the adductors, the inside of the thigh. So I come into a tabletop position, and then I take my knees as wide as they will go. Okay? And you can stay up on your hands like this. You can come down onto your elbows. Again, you can use props to support the body, forehead, or maybe a bolster underneath your torso. And the key is, again, to make sure that you feel the stretch in the inside of your thighs. All right, so right in here, those are called your adductors, right in the inside of the thigh, all the way down to the knee. Okay, so sometimes when people hear groin, they think of just the area that's up near the pubic bone, but actually the groin extends all the way down the leg. And again, we'll be here for 5 minutes. So a few things I want to mention is your feet can be apart, they could be together. Your feet could flex or they could point. All right, your hips can be over the knees, or you can press them back closer to your heels. All right, so how do you decide what you're going to do? You have to feel in your body. And again, there are 2 basic criteria that you're always using to decide what variation you do, how deep you go, things like that. And the first, again, and perhaps most important, is safety. All right, if I push my hips back and I feel a shooting pain in my knee or in the inside of my leg, then it's probably not, it may not be safe, I'll put it that way. Okay, it might be, and in fact, it might be showing me that I have an injury that I need to address. But since I don't know for sure, right, a shooting pain, a sharp pain is something that we probably want to take notice of. Well, until I know what's going on, then I'm going to come out of that. Okay, I'll try a different position. And the other criteria you use to decide how to position yourself is what feels like it's giving you an effective stretch. Okay, so I'll use myself as an example. If I bring my hips over my knees, I don't feel much stretch. I can take my knees wider, but I just don't feel much stretch. Okay, my body is giving me all the feedback I need. I don't need a teacher to look at me to tell me whether it's right or not. Okay, with alignment or things like that. They can't feel what I'm feeling, and what I'm feeling is much more important feedback than how I look. Okay? So yoga is really about how we feel. It's not about how we look. It's not a performance. Yoga is about changing how we feel inside. Okay, so if I push my hips back, oh, there it is. I feel a nice stretch in the inside of the thighs, a good hip opening stretch, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. All right? So again, you have a lot of options, and the way you decide which options are appropriate is by experimentation. All right? We have about 2 minutes left here. Again, if you have a question, drop it in the chat. I'll try and keep an eye on it. But again, if I don't see it right away, please forgive me. There's no sound that's made or anything like that, so sometimes I don't see. Sometimes I get questions about the breath in Yin. And again, I have no idea how many of you have practiced Yin before. I know some of you have. But there is no specific way that you need to be breathing during Yin Yoga. If you have a certain pranayama you want to use, you are welcome to do that. But I will invite the idea that that might actually interfere with perhaps a deeper release or surrender. So like my teacher Paul really likes to say, there's a yin and a yang to everything. Okay, and when I'm trying to control and expand my breath, which is what pranayama means. Pranayama is broken up either as pranayama or pranayama. Okay, so yama means control, ayama means expansion. And both translations are correct. So some breathing techniques expand the breath and vital energy, some control it. Well, control is not really a yin word. Surrender is a yin word, not control. Okay, so we it's not a bad idea to see if we can surrender control of our breath while we do this practice. All right, from there, let's transition onto our belly. Okay, we're just going to rest there for a moment. You could also do child pose. That would be perfectly fine. I'm going to come onto my belly. So this is called crocodile pose. All right, from here we can press back into a tabletop. We'll do just a little bit of the bear pose, moving around a little bit, and then a little bit of the down dog. So just stretching our toes, ankles, knees, and hips. Good, then we transition into sleeping swan. So bringing the right knee forward toward the right wrist, the right foot to the left side of our mat, and then our hips are down and back and our torso comes forward and down. Okay, you could stay up on your hands if you want, and again we always check the two most important things. Safety. In this pose you really want to make sure your knee and your ankle on the right side feel safe. And then the second most important thing is, do I feel an effective stretch in the outside of my hip in here? Okay, maybe along the leg as well, but definitely in this region. Okay, so we're working the glutes now. The first set was for the hamstrings, the second one for the adductors, and now we are working the gluteal group. All right, there are really only 4 major groups of muscles in your hips. There's really only 4 major stretches for the hips. Okay, so if we want to do a hip flow, hip opening flow, which is what we're trying to do today, then we want to hit all those groups. Otherwise, we're creating a very imbalanced practice. We're opening up certain muscles and we're ignoring other ones. Now that might be okay if you have an individualized practice. So in other words, if you know your lifestyle and your body needs certain stretches more than others, that's perfectly fine. But with a group class, we don't really want to practice as though we're practicing geared towards one person. And since we don't know where each individual has tension in their body, we want to do a nice, well-rounded practice. I want to mention a few things here. This knee, your right knee, can be pointed straight ahead. You see mine slightly angled out to the right. I could even bring it further out to the right. Okay, and again, how do I decide what position to put my leg in? I decide based on safety and effectiveness. Does this feel safe, this position? And do I feel an effective stretch here? The right foot can also be moved up closer to the front edge of the mat. Why don't I do that? Because safety. When I do this, my knee hurts. Okay, and if I were to try and force the issue, I would probably damage my knee. So my right foot comes back closer to my left hip. However, if you have what are often called open hips, then that might feel great. You pull that foot up, now you feel a nice effective stretch. Same with the knee. Playing around the position of the knee, that can affect how intense the stretch is and how safe the posture feels. The right foot can flex or point. It's not uncommon for teachers to say that you need to flex the foot, but those teachers are unaware that some people can't, and I happen to be one of those people. In this position, there's no way I'm going to be able to flex my foot. And this happens a lot in yoga, where people learn things that are effective for some people and they try and apply it across the board to everybody. And unfortunately, our bodies just have too much variation for that to work. And so we really need to recognize that and not try and force people to do things that their bodies just really aren't meant to do. The other thing I want to mention is the hips. The hips could rock over to the right side. They could rock over to the left side. I've seen students do this pose effectively both ways. You could also take the block or a blanket and put it under this right hip if you want to stabilize the hips in position. Okay, and again, that's a very personal thing. This is not wrong. Okay, I think many people might think that that's wrong, or this. Again, I've seen students practice in these ways, and it's perfectly effective for them. It's both safe and they are getting a good stretch. Now, what's the difference between sleeping swan and pigeon? Mostly just our intention. Pigeon is an active posture. It's usually done with the arms up like I'm doing here. Sometimes you can bring this leg in. And again, it's usually held for about 30 seconds. Maybe a little longer and oftentimes shorter than that. Now, unless we're holding a posture for at least 30 seconds, some research has shown that it's not really a very effective stretch. It's not going to have a long-term impact, okay? So keep that in mind when you're trying to stretch. All right, let's go ahead and switch sides here. Okay, I came through down dog, but you could also use a tabletop to do that. Now we are targeting the left side of the hip here. All right, I should feel stretch there, and again, it should feel safe. All right, just staying with that stretch, relaxing into it. Another use of the prop that I want to mention is putting something under the forehead like that. That can be very effective. The head is actually quite heavy. And so when I sit here like this, holding my head up for 5 minutes, it's possible that, you know, my neck just gets kind of tired after a while. Those muscles in my neck, they're often overworked anyway. The other use of the prop that I want to mention, or props that I want to mention, looks like this. Okay, I could actually support my whole torso here with the bolster. Now, you may not have these props at home, but, you know, during during the pandemic, who knows how long it's going to last, right? I recommend pick up some. They're worth it. They're pretty standard, so there really is only a handful of yoga props: a bolster, a blanket, these Mexican blankets, a block. You probably want 2. And a yoga strap. And that's pretty much all you're ever going to need. If you're doing restorative yoga, you might want 3 of these blankets. And I think that that's about it. I don't think you ever need more than 1 bolster. There are different sizes and different kinds, so you might find that one kind suits you better than another. That's fine. The blocks are pretty standard. These are cork. I like natural materials, so I bought cork, but you can get them, I think, pretty cheap, made out of foam. Just make sure they don't have too much give in them. Some of them are really squishy, and if they're too squishy, they very often are not suitable for certain types of uses. I'll say it that way, because sometimes we actually stand on them. Sometimes we actually use them for support when doing balancing or arm balancing, and if they're too squishy, they don't really support us very well. Okay? All right, so about halfway through, we're just going to hang out in this posture again until we get to the 5-minute mark. Again, any questions, just put them in the chat. I'll try and keep an eye on it. right, so making your way out of that, you could try a transition to, say, a tabletop or a down dog, and then just coming flat on your belly again. I'm going to set up for our last posture, which is going to target the quads. This is also going to be our most challenging posture and potentially most dangerous posture. So I really want you to take care with it, okay? Now again, you may or may not have props at home. Again, my recommendation is, especially if you're doing a bit of yoga, just make the investment. These last a lifetime. You will probably only buy one set ever, okay? As long as you buy a quality set of props. But I mean, I worked at yoga studios and we have, you know, for over a decade, and then we have the same props. We've always had the same props, all right? So let's go ahead and press back to kneeling. And what we like to do is either sit on our heels, between our heels, or on a block that is between the heels. Now, there are two areas that can be problematic for people. One is the ankles. So if your ankles or feet hurt, you can roll a blanket. Again, this could be a towel that you have at home. It doesn't have to be a fancy yoga blanket, a Mexican blanket. It could be just anything you have at home, relatively firm. Okay, if your ankles don't hurt, but your feet do, you can try this instead. Looks like that. So I'm just padding my ankles, okay? If my knees hurt, also you can sit on your heels or you can sit between your heels. Your feet can point back, toes can point back, or they can point out to the sides. And again, how do you decide? How does it feel? Do you feel safe? Do you feel an effective stretch? We haven't gotten to the stretch yet. So it's right now just safety. Do I feel safe with what I'm doing? All of those positions might feel safe, or none of them might, okay? In which case, I need to hear from you. All right, if the knees hurt, you can try taking your knees wider. Very often that is helpful. You can also try sitting on something, okay? Now, what we're going for with this posture today is a stretch right here in the front of my thighs. So if you feel it like this, then I just want you to stay here. However, if you don't feel it, you begin lowering back to your hands, maybe back onto the elbows, right? You can come back onto a block like this. So I've turned this into like a little recliner, all right? Many people do this, where they come back onto the block or onto the bolster like that. All right? And then some people don't need anything. And they can come all the way back onto the crown of their head or onto their back like that. Okay? So, again, you want to find that stretch at the front of your thighs. What if you don't feel the stretch at the front of your thighs? Well, it's not really a problem. You may feel it in your back, and this is very beneficial for your back. Again, it can't be too intense. Let's look at use of one of the props we haven't looked at yet, which is the yoga strap. And the yoga strap can be very useful in this instance. So as I mentioned a little earlier, very often taking the legs wider can help reduce strain at the knees. And this is something that unfortunately many yoga teachers don't understand and don't recognize, because many of us are told in training that our knees need to always be together or parallel. But anatomically speaking, this isn't always a good idea. And this is one thing I'm very grateful for in my training, is I learned what's called functional anatomy. And with functional anatomy, you recognize what the body can and can't do with certain things. Not all bodies are the same, for instance. All right, so all that said, one way to increase the stretch at the front of the thighs is to actually keep them together. So if I am a really bendy person, and I know you're out there in yoga, we've got, lots of people who are super flexible, then I can lower back with my knees together, and then it becomes quite a bit more intense. Now for me, this is actually sending it into my knees a little bit too much. And the other thing to play around with is, again, whether you're sitting on your heels or between your heels. All right? So keep that in mind as well. And I'll try that now and see which one works more effectively. Now, the reason we're doing this as a quad stretch is because, again, time. So if you like this, but maybe this pose doesn't quite agree with you, and you've got a little more time, then try my normal hip flow. It has a few more postures in it, and it takes about an hour to 75 minutes to do. And again, that's free. It's online on my Patreon page. You can just do it there. There's no charge or anything. So sitting on the heels, coming back, right? That, again, more knees than anything. Let's try feet apart, coming back. I get more back. If I pull my sternum and my pubic bone toward one another, I can increase that stretch a little bit. And then let's try here with the feet pointed out. And yes, a little more in the front of my thighs there. Okay, so again, this is where we would want to experiment. Now, the thing that I need to mention is I have really open quads. Most people don't have quads nearly as open as mine. So it's not going to be a problem for most people. And again, if you come back, you don't feel any stretch, hey, you're still benefiting your back and your quads are still stretching. It's just not going to be super intense. All right, so let's go ahead and gradually make our way out of that pose. There are a few ways out of it. Rolling to one side, pushing yourself back upright, and then releasing the legs one at a time. So find the one that's appropriate for you, and then just go ahead and relax on your back. We call that feeling the rebound. Just take a moment to relax and feel. All right, very good, everyone. Let's bring the legs in, give them a little squeeze. It's called the leg cradle. And you can try rocking side to side, forward and back. Doing a few different movements to release tension where you find it. And then I'll leave you to do Shavasana on your own. I want to thank you for joining me today. I'll be back tomorrow with a Yoga Nidra at noon. So we'll do a little longer Yoga Nidra, probably between 20 to 30 minutes or so. So if you can join me for that, very relaxing way to spend your lunch hour. And for more stuff like this, again, more yoga classes, check out my Patreon page. The links are there. All this stuff is free, but you could also say it's donation based. So the only way I'm staying afloat right now is not because of government assistance, and it's not because I have a lot of income coming in. It's because people like you are helping to support me, making donations. So you can become a member on my Patreon page, and then you'll get regular updates. If you're just doing, one class here and there, and you feel inspired to, you could drop something in my Venmo or my PayPal account. All right. So thank you all. Have a lovely day. I'll be back tomorrow again, noon, and we'll do a Yoga Nidra. And then next week, if you like this, we'll do another sequence next week. And again, I did one last week. So go check out the one from last week for the spine if you enjoyed this. Again, about the same amount of time. All right. Namaste, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll hope to see you again very soon.